Greetings, classicists, and welcome to the lesson on Book 9. Have a look at the image. What does it show? What does it represent? One of the scariest monsters in the Odyssey, one might argue, for a whole variety of reasons. But who is scarier, me or the Cyclops? Don't answer that. Right, so a quick warm-up question. Thinking back to Book 8 and Book 7 and Book 6. In what sense do the Phaeacians in books 6 to 8 represent an almost perfect human society? And are there any potential flaws in Phaeacian society? I want you to do as many bullet points as you can for each of those questions. Now, there is scholarly debate on whether the Phaeacians are perfect, imperfect, or actually quite a lot darker than one might think. So feel absolutely free to have your own opinion. There is no right answer. So pause the video and have a go at as many bullet points as possible. So there's no reason why in the first question you wouldn't have between 10 and 12 bullet points with good clear references to the text. With the second one, I think the flaws are probably there are probably fewer flaws, but there's no reason why you couldn't have 4 or 5 or 6. And again, supported with a little bit of evidence. So stop the video and have a go at that. Good, well done. So what did you get? And again, this is just a list of suggestions, a list of ideas. There is obviously more and you can disagree. So one could argue that the Phaeacians are a perfect society in that they understand the importance of Xenia. So Nausicaa shows excellent Xenia to Odysseus and saves his life through giving him food and a bath and help with his onward journey to the palace of Alcinous. It is a society of farming, so control over the chaos of nature. Outside of Alcinous's palace, we have crops that produce fruit or whatever it is twice a year. So think about that, in the past, or rather in the human world, once a year, and you're sort of hanging on for the next harvest in order to be able to feed yourself. But here they've got food twice a year. So what an amazing sort of liberation that would be for society. And they've got wine, and they've got these lush meadows and all sorts of things. So it's nature, and it's under control nature. They've got wine, they've got olives, they've got all the things that they need. They show great techne and understanding with their building. Remember, their city is walled, although in a sense it doesn't need to be because there are no hostile invaders, but it shows great technology and skill. And the palace of Alcinous, again, with its enamel walls, or rather enamel friezes on the interior, and its bronze walls and its dogs of Hephaestus. These are all signs of great techne and technology and really sort of positive things. They're also great sailors, and they sail around the world with these ships that are actually magical, as we'll discover later on. They're kind of self-guided ships. The sailors don't necessarily do that much, and the ships take people where they need to go. So sailing, control of the sea, is again another sign of great civilization for the Greeks. Remember, they're in this seafaring culture, but the ships are relatively primitive and dangerous, although skillfully handled. So a culture who sails and sails well is the sign of a civilized culture. And we'll see later on, we'll see who doesn't sail, Amazons and Cyclopes. What else? Well, lineage. So they've got this lineage from the gods, which is again often a sign of a good civilization, although, as we see in Book 9, being descended from the gods doesn't necessarily mean you're civilized. And also, it is a peaceful society. There isn't the chaos and carnage of war. Is that necessarily a good thing? They do understand the importance of training for war and discipline with the Phaeacian Games, where they focus on warlike sports of throwing discus and running. but there's no war in itself. Surely a good thing? So what are the flaws with Phaeacian society? Again, very debatable. There is this sense, and I don't know if it's fully explored, but is it ruled really by women? Alcinous is a bit of an idiot, really. Arete is the one behind the scenes controlling things. Is that hinting at something a little bit more unnatural and a little bit more dangerous? Is it a soft society? You think about Odysseus as a real hero, a real manly man, when he stands up for his discus throw and just picks up a massive discus and obliterates the Phaeacians in terms of a competition. Is this a sign of people who've gone actually a bit soft because of their lack of war, their lack of ability to test themselves on the field of battle? Do they really have the same kleos as other heroes? Again, these are debated things. This is the beauty of A-level. This is the beauty of the Odyssey. Do you need a little bit of war to show bravery, or is the ideal society one of complete peace? Yeah, it's very much an open question, and I don't know if Homer even solves it himself, as we'll see when we see Achilles in the underworld. So those would be some of the things that I would hope by now you have picked out. If you picked none of them out, then go away, have a cup of tea, and think about what you did wrong. Why are you not picking out some of these key concepts that we have covered? Excellent. On to something to think about. What makes a good leader? Now, the chap hiding behind me is Alexander the Great, and I would imagine you recognise all of the other leaders, and I've put good in inverted commas, as you can see, for probably obvious reasons. What makes a good leader? Have a think, have a chat with yourself or your cat, because you're doing a video lesson. And the next point, perhaps, to think through, what criteria should we use to judge a Homeric leader? Because a classic question is, to what extent is Odysseus a good leader? And that word good carries a lot of weight. What do we mean by good? Is he good from a modern perspective? Is he good from a Homeric perspective? There are certainly ways in which those two worlds join, but I think there are definitely some significant differences in terms of what makes a good modern leader and what makes a good Homeric leader. I think there's a lot of similarities, and I think they're to a degree exemplified by some of the characters up here. So what makes a good leader? Well, the ability to speak and the ability to persuade. So you look at Churchill, you look at Martin Luther King, you look at Hitler, you look at Alexander the Great. They are powerful, powerful speakers. That's not to make a moral judgment on the ends to which they were putting their speeches to. So speaking and persuasion and sort of verbal leadership, if you like, seems to be this quite a good, quite an important leadership skill throughout. What else? What other criteria? Well, leadership in war, planning and strategy, and the degree to which you do that effectively and properly. And obviously Martin Luther King, a great leader, but not a military man, whereas the other three involved in the greatest wars of their time and arguably ever. So does your ability to lead men in war count? Should that be something that's crucial to being a leader? Well, yes, obviously. But does Odysseus actually lead his men in war during the Odyssey? And to what extent does he actually have control of his men? That's quite an interesting one. A modern war leader is expected in some senses to have minute control over his men and what they do, or at least the ability to do so. Leaders in the Odyssey strangely seem to have a lot less control over their men than we might expect when we're talking about modern generals. What other criteria should be used to judge a Homeric leader? Well, I think another thing to think about is it different? I don't know. The degree to which you use your men to fulfill your heroic status, if you like. And maybe this is a modern thing too, no doubt. Many of the leaders on the screen were motivated, maybe not openly, but possibly internally, to use their followers to improve their personal status as politicians, as speakers, as leaders, as generals. So is it necessarily wrong for Odysseus to use his men, possibly even leading to their loss of life, to increase his own status? From a Homeric perspective, probably not. From a modern perspective, that wouldn't be something we'd want to admit, although probably goes on just as much as it does in a Homeric world. So there'll be other things, but just give this some thought, because it is now time for the Book 9 test. So do it, mark it, and remember you want to be getting 80%, and that is the 70% is the kind of minimum as a pass. You really should be getting 80%, because these are quite simple, clinical, factual knowledge questions that have almost all come up in an exam before as points that you should know. If you're not getting them, then make sure you're rereading the reading questions. Make sure you're thinking about those reading questions in another way. So if you've done the reading, you've done the reading questions, taken a few of your own notes where appropriate, and it's still not going in, then that's a bit unfair, because for some people it will, but for those of you who it's not going in for, you need to take proactive, what a horrible word, you need to take action and start doing maybe some Quizlets, recycling those facts, writing your own paper quizzes, doing a Kahoot. There's all sorts of things that you can do, but you need to be revisiting that knowledge yourself, especially in these tricky times of coronavirus, where I can't do as much recapping and revisiting and teaching in class as I would love to. Anyway, stop the video now and do the test and self-mark it. Go. Sorry, I got catted then, and everything fell apart, so hopefully the continuation will work. Anyway, we're talking about fates, gods, and free will. So to what extent are events, especially events that lead to suffering, due to free will? To what extent are they due to fate? That often splits down quite neatly between Odysseus and his men. The other classic area there is to what extent are the interventions of gods significant? And we've talked a little bit about that in the sort of analysis, the ways you can think about it, because something could have literary significance, or it could have significance within the plot, or both. So all of the things that Athene does, all of the things that Ino does, things that Poseidon does, and things that other gods do throughout the Wanderings. The Wanderings are what we call books 9 to 12, because it's Odysseus telling his tale of the Wanderings. The other thing that can come up quite a lot is the development of Odysseus's skills, if that is even a reality. There's a debate there. You can look at the Wanderings, books 9 to 12, as Odysseus learning all of the skills that he needs to achieve a successful homecoming later on in the other half of the Odyssey. You can look at Odysseus changing from a Homeric hero into a new kind of hero. Scholars disagree with both, but it's a classic question, and it's okay to disagree. You can say, well, he doesn't develop. He stays Odysseus and he remains Odysseus. That's fine. So these are just some of the key themes that will come up. There are always others, but these are when you're looking at books 9 to 12, these are some of the really common areas that examiners will focus on. So have them in your minds throughout. Right, so one thing to remember, and it's very easy to forget, books 9 to 12 are a speech. And so if you get a question on speeches, yes, you can do a little couple of paragraphs from Calypso's speech. You can look at Odysseus' speech to Nausicaa, but also you can view books 9 to 12 as a single speech. There are some brief interludes, but I think it's fair to view it as a single speech nonetheless. And I do think about this, and I don't want you to kind of disappear down some kind of nihilistic rabbit hole, but what is Odysseus trying to achieve with his speech? Think about the situation he's in. He is with the Phaeacians, he wants to get home, and as a hero especially, he wants to get home with the maximum amount of wealth through a Xenia relationship. He wants to come home piled high with treasure, with gold, with silver, with cloaks, with swords, with as much stuff as he possibly can. So, how might this impact the nature of the speech? Well, it's a very valid framework of analysis to think about the extent to which Odysseus is manipulating the Phaeacians with this speech. And how might you manipulate the Phaeacians? Well, you put a great weight on their greatest fears, their greatest enemy. And is it really an accident that in Book 9 we have 2 little short stories just to get things warmed up, and then most of the book is an exploration of the Cyclops, the Phaeacians' greatest enemy, the society that is practically an inversion of everything the Phaeacians stand for, and Odysseus suffers terribly and cruelly at the hands of this Cyclops. What is that most likely to inspire amongst the Phaeacians? Sympathy, understanding, and a desire to show the world that they're nothing like the Cyclops. And how can you do that? By giving the most amazing Xenia possible. So, is Odysseus manipulating the Phaeacians or simply telling a good story? Can we ever know? No. And that, in a sense, is another beauty of the Odyssey. I probably would never take the route that Odysseus is lying and making up the whole story. But I think it is very fair and very valid to say, especially depending on the essay question, that Odysseus may be placing great emphasis on certain things in order to stimulate a positive response from the Phaeacians. So another little piece of context, and that is wine and civilization. Now, a very famous author, and she is very famous, very important with Homer. You should have listened to one of her videos already, and she plays a crucial role in the next course, Edith Hall. She says that wine is essential to the ancient Greek way of life, and this is true. It is a fundamental part of religion, it's a fundamental part of food and dining and hospitality, and the way that it is drunk is a crucial marker of civilization. Now, you must drink wine mixed with water to show restraint and to show balance. If you drink unmixed wine straight from the bottle, you are a savage. If you drink wine from one of these kylixes, a type of pot, and you mix it and you drink it in moderation and in a suitable time and venue, then that is a sign of great civilization. And these kylixes are quite cool. Hopefully we'll see them in the British Museum at some point. It might not be our normal Christmas trip, but next year I am sure. And they are brilliant little things. So you pick them up and, well, not in the museum, obviously you'd be killed and sent to jail if you did that, but you pick them up, they've got wine in them, and as you turn them to drink, and that swirls the wine around, and it creates a kind of drinking effect, if you like. And let's see if the animation works. Yay, there we go. So as the wine in this this is the inside of a kylix. No, reverse it. Sorry, this is deeply, oh my god, this is ruining my brain. Okay, yeah, there you go. So that that's the inside of the kylix, you know, looking at it face down, and as you're swishing your wine around, it would look like you know, the boat going through the sea, and then every now and again the dolphins would pop up, and you can see the dolphins that when there's no liquid in there, it looks a bit weird, but actually they'd look like they were jumping up and down in and out of the sea and all this sort of stuff. And this is a scene from Dionysus, or the story of Dionysus and the dolphins. So wine and its appropriate drinking and consumption is such a fundamental part of Greek identity, and culture. And as we look at book 9, we'll see how the Cyclops doesn't really get it. Okay, so Odysseus tells the story. He starts on book 9. He confesses to being Odysseus. Maybe this is something that has already been more or less worked out by the Phaeacians. So is there much point in hiding it? Anyway, it would have been obvious when he started to tell the story. He couldn't really have told the story without revealing his identity. So he reveals his identity to the great amazement and wonder and awe of the Phaeacians. Remember, a lot of them are there because Athene has been encouraging them to all attend assembly and take part in these sorts of things. So Odysseus leaves Troy with his army, and we know that the gods, it's not particularly explicitly pointed out, but we all know that the gods are deeply unhappy with all of the Greeks because of what they have done to Troy. They've set fire to temples. Maybe even the bloodshed and killing and slavery and rape has been excessive by standards of the ancient world as well. So maybe there needs to be some punishment, but I think it's fundamentally the fact that they insulted the gods and their temples. Speaking of gods and of worship, here's Meme. Thank you, Meme. So Odysseus and his men and his fleet, it's important to remember he starts off as a warlord with an army, with a fleet, and they sail back from Troy, and the first place that they stop off is Ismarus, the land of the Cicones. And this is an important little example for a whole variety of reasons. So the first thing to consider is there a breach of Xenia? Because Odysseus and his men have shown up, they've invaded this land and killed people. Surely this is a big breach of Xenia. Well, no, it's not, because Odysseus and his men do not approach as suppliants. The Cicones, the people of Ismarus, are, according to some legends, allies of the Trojans. So this is really Odysseus doing quite a heroic thing on the way back, which is stopping off to pick up more plunder, punish his enemies, and achieve an even higher heroic status. So the reason why we point this out is because of essay questions, which often revolve around Xenia and the degree to which good Xenia is punished and good Xenia is rewarded and bad Xenia is punished. And sometimes students will say, but he destroys his hosts, the Cicones, and does all of these terrible things, and surely that then makes him worthy of punishment. Sorry, Meme's pulling the mirror off the wall. No, I would argue that he doesn't come as a suppliant, he comes as an invader, and therefore Xenia doesn't apply. How effective is Odysseus as a leader in this situation? Well, it's quite interesting. There seems to be quite a serious weakness to him here. They defeat the Cicones of Ismarus, and his men party on the beach. And Odysseus says to them, we need to leave because we've been here long enough, there'll be problems. And his men basically say, no, we're tired, we want to party, we barbecue, celebrate our victory. And Odysseus doesn't have control over his men, and he doesn't seem to try very hard to persuade them to leave. And lo and behold, he's proved right. The inland Cicones come in and kill a certain number of men from each of his 12 ships. So it's 6 from each ship, and he's got 12 ships. So is that 72? There we go. Bit of maths. Work it out yourself. But that's a substantial number of casualties. People who've lost their lives after this. And think about it. They've had this 10-year war at Troy, and they die in this relatively minor conflict because they just want to have eat after a battle. So Odysseus doesn't seem to be very effective as a leader here. And when you're again looking at this idea of fate and free will, the men seem to make a bad choice. The gods haven't come down and affected their minds and made them demanded that they stay there and sacrifice to them and eat food or anything. This does seem to be a personal decision of Odysseus's men to dawdle when they should have packed up and left. So going back to what Zeus says at the beginning of Book 1, men blame the gods for their suffering, even though it's their own transgressions that causes it. So not a big story, but some great little examples of Odysseus not being an effective leader and the men being responsible for their own fate. So on to the next story. Again, it's another little mini story, and this is quite an interesting story for a whole variety of reasons. First of all, it may well be the first ever mention of opium. There's academic debate, quite valid academic debate, that these lotus eaters are opium addicts. So they've discovered opium, which can be taken from poppies and processed in a relatively simple way. So you cut the side of these opium poppies, leave the sap there to dry, and then scrape it off, and you've got unrefined opium that will, of course, have quite significant effects. So it doesn't require vast, complicated processing to turn into a drug. It's there with a little bit of drying in the sun, fundamentally. This doesn't work with normal poppies in the UK, so do not go out and start cutting poppies and hoping to harvest opium. It is a very specific poppy and grows quite famously in places like Afghanistan, but not in Europe. So yes, bear that in mind. So into the Lotus Eaters, lines 83 to 104. So let's think about this. Again, some of these core frameworks, these core points of discussion. Is there a breach of Xenia? Well, this is an interesting one because in a strange way, these Lotus Eaters are sort of showing what they think is good Xenia. So people have arrived and they've welcomed them in and they've given them, food and drink. But the food, the drug, the lotus flower, is appalling in many ways because it takes away your memory of home, it takes away your identity, it takes away who you are. Now, for some people, the idea of being sort of stoned on a tropical beach with a bunch of hippies is, hey, that's a good thing. What's so bad about that? But if you think about it from a Homeric perspective, this is actually really quite a wicked thing. They are trying to take away your identity. They're trying to take away your status. They're trying to take away who you are. So actually, you could look at this as being quite a significant and dark threat to Odysseus and his men. So how effective is Odysseus as a leader in this little snippet, this extract? Well, here, in a sense, he redeems himself from his sort of weakness earlier on. He races out by himself, doesn't put any of his other men at risk, grabs the men who have been captured by the lotus fruit, if you like, and takes them back and ties them up until they get over their addiction to lotus fruit or opium or whatever it might be. So this is quite clean, direct, good quality leadership. Are the men responsible for their own fate? Well, no. Odysseus is the one who sends them out, and they choose to take part in Xenia, which I suppose gives them, well, I don't know, is that really their own fault? They're following a very standard societal norm. I don't think I would say that's a bad decision that leads them to their fate. And in terms of fate, they survive. So, there's a little bit to think about there, but I think it's obviously better when you're looking at serious consequences, namely death. Now, this leads to a very strange theory by a Frenchman, I can't remember his name, French philosopher or poet, who argues that the Odyssey from this point on is just a strange trip of Odysseus, and that's why we get, and that actually he takes the lotus flower, and that's why we start from this point onwards to get into this weird, insane, fantastical world of bizarre creatures. Because up until this point, although there are gods and goddesses in the background, they're not really, there's nothing that couldn't be interpreted by someone thinking that actually, that small child who guided them to the city was Athene, or, the storm was sent by Poseidon, but Poseidon, see Poseidon. So up until this point, a lot of the sort of weird things can be explained away by human perception, but from now on it becomes these physical, in-your-face, bizarre monsters. And then by the time Odysseus gets back to Ithaca and he washes up as a sort of naked old man on the beach, that's Odysseus sort of coming out of this drug-fueled haze. I think there's some interesting ideas to think about in that theory, in the nature of truth in the story of books 9 to 12. I would not use this theory as a big counter-argument or point of discussion in an essay, to be honest. But it's an interesting one. It is worth a thought when you've understood the main core academic concepts. So moving on. Now we get to the land of the Cyclops. Odysseus piles his men in, sails away from the land of the Lotus Eaters, and there clearly is a transition from the known world into mythical, unknown, unchartable regions, and lots of scholars have a huge amount of fun trying to work out where all these places are in reality, although I don't know if that's actually a valid academic idea. It's good fun nonetheless. So do be careful if you look for a map of Odysseus's wanderings. Some people, scholars, things say with absolute certainty, well, this is where the Lotus Eaters are, this is where the Cyclops was, blah, 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 blah. But that's not really possible, although it's interesting to do, and we'll certainly have a go later on. So lines 117 to 140. How does Odysseus emphasize the uncivilized nature of the society of the Cyclops in this passage? So stop the video and come up with a list. Good. So did you get, and these are things that I hope you'd have picked out. Some are more important than others, but there's no hunting. There is no hunting. So again, no kleos in that sense. There isn't that same focus or thirst for glory, either in warfare. There doesn't seem to be warfare in the same way, but there certainly isn't hunting and kleos. There's no ploughing or sowing, so there isn't that themis. There isn't that civilization of wild nature. There's no ships. So again, there's no themis, there's no civilization, there's no control of nature. There's no trade, and there's no foreigners. So if there are no foreigners and no travellers, then, and as we see rather spectacularly, there's no Xenia, and that's the cornerstone of civilization, especially when you're looking at the Phaeacians. There are lush meadows, but they don't seem to be planted with grapes, although the Cyclops does say that they have some grapes and they do make their own wine, but it's very inferior wine. Are they just harvesting wild grapes? They have safe harbour, so they have the potential for ships, and they have this sort of golden opportunity which they won't take, and in a sense that kind of rejection of potential is even more extreme. Some places may not have a harbour because it's too difficult and too dangerous, whereas the Cyclops have been gifted by the gods with this harbour which they refuse to use in a civilized fashion. And as always, it's important they've got fresh water. Remember that you need this supply of fresh water to make your wine, to live, to grow your crops, and again, these crystal clear streams are a great sign of that. So the Cyclops again have got this natural society of potential which they refuse to civilize in a similar-ish way to Calypso and her island. So on to book 9 and the Cyclops himself, one of the most important stories in the Odyssey. Any essay on the wanderings will have a lot of detail on the Cyclops. Any essay on societies, this part of the story is absolutely crucial. So make sure you know it inside out through the reading questions and through answering these questions. So let's think about Odysseus. He starts off quite cleverly. He pulls up all his ships on an island and then sails onto the land of the Cyclopes with just one boat to just check out that everything is okay. He then chooses a further small group of men to go with him to explore the land. And he says how he had a sense of foreboding, a sense of danger. And is that something we can criticise him for? Why does he push on if he's got that sense of danger? Why doesn't he just go, no, okay, well, go back to the empty island, pluck a whole bunch of goats. Do you pluck goats? I don't know. Hunt goats? Yes, probably better. So he hunts a whole bunch of goats, harvests whatever he needs or can, and sails on to the next place. Why does he push forward? Well, again, remember, he's a hero. And again, remember, he's telling a story with the benefit of hindsight and with a view to manipulating the Phaeacians, perhaps. Always worth bearing those things in mind. So he goes with his men into the cave of the Cyclops, where we see cheese, lots of cheese and lots of animals. And his men say to Odysseus, let's just steal some cheese and head off. This looks wrong, this feels bad. But Odysseus doesn't. He stays because he wants Xenia gifts to increase his... Sorry, I think there's about to be a cat rampage. He wants Xenia gifts to increase his teammate. And again, who is he sending a slight message again to the Phaeacians? That Xenia gifts are crucial. There you go. There's both of them. Loki. There you go. A rare Loki sighting. Anyway. So yes, but is this good leadership? Well, we see that it's not. Odysseus's desire for wealth and interaction with this strange and dangerous land that he already had some fear of leads to the death, the horrible death of a fair number of his men. But when we're judging that, are we judging that in a too modern perspective? As a hero, is it okay for Odysseus to risk his life and risk the life of his men to obtain, time, kleos, knowledge, excitement, exploration? I think we need to be a bit balanced about that. I think from a modern perspective, we would be much more likely to say, this was a bad decision. Odysseus is acknowledging in hindsight that it's a bad decision, but I don't know if there's as much just of moral judgment on that decision as we might have. And again, just a quick one thrown in there. Are the men responsible for their own fate when they die? Well, no. Clearly, again, they have been given a very clear instruction by Odysseus. You've got to go off and do this thing. And so they do. So here, the men are not making bad decisions that lead to their death. And when we're going back to these fate and free will essays, there's a lot of fate attached to Odysseus, but and there's definitely some attached to his men, but the degree to which it is a lot more debatable with his men, although the whole thing is debatable, as always. So Odysseus and his men stay there waiting for Xenia gifts, and they tuck into what the Cyclops has left them. Well, not left them, but has left. So is there a breach of Xenia here? Well, yes, I think Odysseus is being a bit cheeky, and his men are being cheeky. They've found an unaccompanied cave, an unaccompanied area, and they are helping themselves to what's there. And I think that is a flaw in their Xenia. I think that's showing a little bit of rudeness, but I think we have to be careful about degrees of rudeness. Stealing someone's cheese that, yes, they probably would give you anyway if they were following the rules of Xenia, could be seen to be a little bit forward, a little bit arrogant maybe, but is it a massive, massive breach of Xenia that means you deserve to be eaten? I don't know. But does it fit in with this pattern of if you breach Xenia, you get punished? Well, yes, it seems to. Is there a clear mechanism of the gods saying, right, they've eaten a piece of cheese, therefore they're going to have their brains smashed out on the floor? don't know. And it's also important to remember this is Odysseus's perception of the event. Are there things going on behind the scenes where the gods are causing the punishment of individuals for breaching Xenia? In this case, that's probably a bit of a stretch. They nicked some cheese. Maybe you've got very strong feelings about cheese, but I think we might be stretching the concept. But worth thinking about nonetheless. Okay, so Odysseus and his men are waiting for the Cyclops to return, or they obviously don't know it's the Cyclops, and we get another classic speech, line 259 to 271. How does Odysseus show his skill with words? As always, try to consider what he is trying to achieve, consider the context, consider whether he's successful or not, and again, a little point to think about: is this just aimed at the Cyclops? He's telling a story to the Phaeacians. He's telling a story of their worst enemy, their opposite, if you like, and the awful Xenia that the Cyclops gives him, the awful breaches of civilization that go on there. Is he trying to make the Phaeacians go, God, we need to show that we're as civilized as possible, have a ton of Xenia? Is he flattering the Phaeacians? All sorts could be going on. Don't get too meta all the time, but remember this is a speech by Odysseus to the Phaeacians. So stop the video and have a cup of tea and a Kit Kat. There's some orange chocolate fingers that have been just brought out, which are amazing. So maybe some of those. And then I would spend a good 10 minutes picking this apart and do a little quote and a written development, written explanation of that quote and how it shows Odysseus' skill with words. And we shall talk it through in a moment. So stop. Right, so here are just some extracts. You may have got all of them, some of them, or none of them. But think about the context. So Odysseus is trapped in a cave with a clearly very strong, terrifying monster. Physical force is probably not going to cut it on a sort of on the basis of who's there, but that doesn't mean physical force isn't a point to make, as we can see. So Odysseus says straight away that we are Achaeans from Troy. So he's making the point that we are part of a big group, and we're part of a victorious group. We are part of the strongest, most effective, most dangerous army that there has ever been, the Greeks at Troy. So really suggesting that, yes, you as an individual monster may be able to kill me and my 12 men, or however many it was, but we are part of a much bigger, badder army. He then goes on to talk about Zeus's will, so reminding the Cyclops of Zeus and the consequences of dealing with Zeus and making Zeus angry, and saying, this is a world of Zeus's will, so don't anger Zeus. He reinforces this idea of strength and threat, if you like, by saying we are part of great Agamemnon's army. So naming a specific individual, again, reinforcing his credentials as a hero, pointing out that one of his friends is the greatest warlord ever in terms of size and scale. I mean, as an individual hero, Agamemnon sort of sucks a bit, but nonetheless, he is the leader of the most powerful kingdom, most powerful army. He then explicitly develops the threat and says, we have sacked many cities. So if we've sacked many cities who've insulted us, what are we going to, think about what we could do to, admittedly a big monster in a cave. And then, as always, Odysseus covers another angle. He talks about Zeus being the god of hosts. Having previously talked about the sort of consequences of angering Zeus or irritating Zeus and reinforcing the power of Zeus, he now reminds the Cyclops that Zeus is the god of hosts, and hospitality is important, and if you show bad hospitality, you get punished. Then at the end, when he talks about his wrecked ship, he's being clever here. He is protecting the rest of his men because, well, you could argue he's protecting the rest of his men. You could argue he's protecting his escape route. Again, it depends on what you feel about Odysseus. But he is saying, my ship is wrecked, and that's so the Cyclops won't attempt to go and find it and destroy it and his men on it. So a clever thing to say. Possibly also a plea for sympathy. A way of protecting the men on the boat who wouldn't be expecting the Cyclops, or a way of protecting his own escape route if really it's all about him. So, great skill with words from Odysseus, as always. So, Odysseus shows this amazing skill with words, but it doesn't work. The Cyclops is a barbaric savage and does all sorts of appalling things to Odysseus and his men. He eats his guests rather than provides them with food in a shocking inversion of Xenia. So it's not just that he doesn't give them food, but the guests themselves become food. So this isn't just a sort of bad Xenia, this is a total reversal. There's no way of it being worse from the Cyclops. So he claims he doesn't follow the gods' rules, and then he eats his guests. I mean, there just is no way of making this more horrible, more uncivilized. I suppose the Cyclops could be female, perhaps, but maybe it's the fact that the Cyclops is male and therefore, in theory, should know better that makes it makes it worse. Anyway, so Odysseus is trapped in the cave with the Cyclops, and he has to make a whole series of decisions. So what good decisions does Odysseus make? I would like you to have a look at this list and consider why they are good decisions. In theory, these were supposed to appear in an animation, but they clearly haven't, and I can't take them away or be bothered to change it. So the task is going to be, why are these good decisions? Which kind of works too. Brilliant. So stop the video, write them down. Why are they good decisions? Okay, so let's have a look. Well, Odysseus makes the decision not to kill the Cyclops, which is extremely important because only the Cyclops can withdraw the boulder. Withdraw? That's not really the right word. Roll back the boulder that is keeping them in there. And if they kill the Cyclops, then they die of starvation in a pretty horrible, horrible fashion. So it's extremely important that the door is open when they kill or disable the Cyclops. And again, that's a tricky-ish thing for a hero to do. You know, he needs to show restraint because the desire to kill the Cyclops must be pretty extreme when you've seen what he does to your men, and there's always that kind of passionate thing of like, well, I'll just kill him and then we'll deal with the problem of the stone. So it shows great restraint and control and understanding not to kill the Cyclops. He then prays to Athene, which is important because we may see Athene helping him later on, although perhaps Odysseus doesn't know it. You know, are these intelligent ideas Athene influencing his mind, but yet Odysseus isn't aware of it? Because remember, this is Odysseus speaking. He's telling his story. Or is actually Athene not there at all? Is this all Odysseus' own skill? Which is perfectly valid, very valid. Probably the argument I would go for it, just for balance. But yeah, there could be some hints at Athene. So he hardens the stake and hides it. Well, this is important. You need to harden the stake because otherwise the wood could be too soft. Probably not too soft for the Cyclops' eye, but you know, you can create a wooden spear by burning it. You know, sharpening wood and then burning it. So this is important to really get that kind of that penetration and depth into the Cyclops' eye. And then he hides it, and again, crucial because of the Cyclops is the Cyclops' staff, and if the Cyclops is looking for his staff and finds it, then he takes it and walks off with it. So notices that the end is sharp and goes, So hiding it is also a crucial decision. Now, Odysseus then draws lots for who is going to take on the risky role of helping him. is this a good decision? I think so. I think he says he's the one who's going to do it, and he leaves it up to fate for the rest of his men. So I think if he chose certain men, maybe that wouldn't be fair. Maybe they would be resentful. Whereas this way, especially in a society that believes in culture, especially in a culture that believes in the power of fate and the gods, this is quite a fair thing to do. Say, look, this is super dangerous. Let's just draw lots. Then it'll be a decision of the gods who takes the risk rather than me. So actually, probably a reasonable thing for him to do for his men. He gives the Cyclops the wine, the undiluted wine, and really encourages him to drink it, pushes him to drink it. It's the persuasion and sort of humility of Odysseus at this point that really gets the Cyclops to drink it. Although once the Cyclops has started, he gives in to his kind of uncivilized passions and starts guzzling down unmixed wine, which shows what a savage barbarian he is. The Odysseus then does something extremely important, a bit controversial for a hero, but he gives himself the name of Nobody. And we see at the end why this is absolutely crucial. When Polyphemus is screaming for assistance and then says, "Nobody has blinded me," the other Cyclopes go, "Well, then you're obviously mad and we want nothing to do with you." Whereas if the Cyclopes had given a name, "Odysseus has blinded me," then the other Cyclopes would have thought, well, we have these hostile strangers in our land, we need to go and kill them and drive them off. But basically deal with this problem. There's no way Odysseus and his men could have really outrun them or escaped them or done anything. So this is a crucial part of Odysseus's plan, concealing his identity. And the concealment and revelation of identity is extremely important. And Odysseus perhaps becomes more aware of that as the story goes on. He shows good leadership again by lashing his men to 3 sheep. So, a good decision. His men probably aren't strong enough to hang underneath another sheep, and the 3 sheep, 1 sheep can't carry a man. So lashing them together in groups of 3 is a great way of getting them all out. And then by leaving last, that's crucial, because otherwise, how would that work with his men? So he shows bravery. He does much more what we would think a leader should do, but it's also him using his own strength, because his men are tied under the sheep, whereas he is holding on underneath this giant ram, this big ram, just using his own kind of physical strength and using that to escape the cave. Good. Okay. So Odysseus in the Cyclops cave makes a whole series of good, brave, practical decisions showing techne, kleos, concern for his men's safety. It seems like at the end he's done a pretty good job. Maybe in the beginning he was a little bit rash, but now that he's seen and understood the gravity of the situation, he's become a great leader in getting his men out of it, those that survive, obviously. Right, so what I'd like to do now is another 10-mark question. So lines 378 to 403, so you have to use your books. The question: how vividly does Homer describe the blinding of the Cyclops? Now remember the drill. Pick out a technique or word, very short example, so short quote, and then analysis. Why does it make something vivid? And think back to other English lit that you studied, the little sort of English lit lesson that we did. Just a single word. What is the impression that it conveys? What's the difference between throw, hurl, chuck, lob? They all create different pictures and push forward different ideas and emphasize different values and concepts and so on and so forth. So why do these things have this effect? Why do they make it vivid? So stop it at once, and you've got 12 minutes. Go. Okay, so just a few points to consider in your answer, and I'd like you to have a go at marking it. What would you give yourself out of 10? Have a look back at the mark scheme you used to mark the 10 marker on the Palace of Alcinous and see where you think your answer fits in that mark scheme. Now, this is an example mark scheme, and they absolutely do not say they give you everything that you should pick out or could pick out. It just throws out a few ideas for you to think about, just to get you understanding the type of thing that they might be looking for. So, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think, you know, it's interesting, and some of the things there seem a little bit of a stretch, to be honest, but that's the nature of literature. But I think one of the things I like, especially on the second line, so the fact that Homer uses the word seizing implies sudden, speedy action. So it's not holding, it's seizing, grabbing, and that creates, you know, speed, suddenness, with a little bit of strength and panic attached to it, and determination, as they mention up there. Drove suggests power. Yeah, absolutely. So they didn't wriggle. They didn't wriggle the stake into his eye. They didn't slap the stake into his eye. They drove the stake into his eye. So what do we get from that? We get that sense of power. So have a read through here. There's they do sort of talk a little bit about a sort of counter argument, but I just don't do that. This is the only time they've ever done it, and the exam board we use now is a little bit different as well. It's interesting, but don't do these effectiveness counter arguments for these kind of questions, where they talk about the power of the drill versus the fragility of timber. Well, that's why the simile works so well. And again, you've got this sort of maritime seafaring culture who know all about building boats. They know nothing about stabbing something into a cyclops' eye, so it works really well. Anyway, have a read through that. These are the kind of way that you answer these questions, the type of things that you could pick out. You may well have picked completely different things. I would hope you've picked some of these things, especially the simile. The simile is always your go-to, and should be covered in a question if it's there, but there's so many things. So what did you give yourself? I'm sure you marked yourself firmly, but fairly. Right, so just a quick little concept now, and that is the concept of hubris. And hubris can be defined as arrogance so extreme that it offends the gods. And we see this in a whole variety of myths. This is quite a powerful story for the Greeks. The top picture is perhaps the most famous hubristic story ever, and that is Daedalus and Icarus. So they create these wings to escape the island of King Minos, and they are moving from the realm that the gods gave them, that of the land, to something more, some godlike powers that of flying. So they need to be unbelievably careful when they do this. And Daedalus, Icarus's father, understands this, and he says to Icarus, don't fly too close to the sun, don't fly too close to the sea, don't prat about, fly, land, and then hopefully the gods will overlook this change to the natural world that we have made. But Icarus, being a young, impetuous teenager, important lesson there, flies too close to the sun, the wax holding the wings together falls apart, and then he falls into the sea and drowns. The picture that I'm covering up, which you can't really see, is Arachne, who boasts that she is a better weaver than the gods, and so Athene turns her into a spider. So this arrogant, boastful idea of comparing yourself to a god or challenging the world the gods have created, this is hubris. And to the left, you've got our good friend Actaeon, who sees sorry, cat's causing chaos again. So we've got Actaeon, who sees Artemis naked and is told never to open his mouth again and speak words, otherwise he'll be killed. The idea being that he must never tell anyone what he's seen, and he hears his beloved hunting dogs and shouts out their names, and then he's turned into a deer and hunted and killed by his own dogs. So tough story, but that's the nature of the gods. So hubris, arrogance so extreme that it offends the gods. This is an important concept in the Odyssey, and a very important concept next year as well. So well worth just mentioning, and we mention it now because arguably Odysseus shows hubris in a moment. Hubris is part of an important cycle, if you like, called hubris, arte, and nemesis. So you show hubris, you show arrogance that is so extreme it offends the gods. This leads to madness, and you normally do something so insane that the gods are forced to send nemesis, divine vengeance. And nemesis can be carried out by other mortals, it can be carried out by gods, or even the personification of nemesis called nemesis. It's also where we get the phrase, nemesis, someone's nemesis, someone's divine punishment, someone's retribution for the things that they have done. So Odysseus shows hubris, extreme arrogance, boasting that he has outwitted and hurt the Cyclops, who is the son of Poseidon, and his madness is revealing his name, because up until that point the Cyclops had no idea what was going on, and Poseidon didn't seem to notice or particularly care. But once the Cyclops knows Odysseus' name, then the Cyclops prays to Poseidon, who hears the prayer, and then in theory unleashes this punishment on Odysseus that results in all of his men dying and him being torn away from his family for the best part of 10 years. So why does Odysseus have to tell the Cyclops his name? Well, one could argue he doesn't. However, if we're thinking of Odysseus as a traditional hero, he needs the kleos. The Cyclops, if he knows Odysseus' name, will tell the story of Odysseus defeating him, and thus his name, his fame, his fortune, his reputation is spread around, because Odysseus presumably is also going to be telling this story. So it's important in a sense that the world understands Odysseus' great victory in this matter, to give him kleos. That's a very sort of traditional Homeric perspective. Identity must be broadcast, especially at a moment of victory or significance. Now, Odysseus wishes greatly that he hadn't done this, and he understands the importance of concealing identity to a degree with the Phaeacians as a precaution, but then when he gets back to Ithaca later on. Now, the Cyclops then gives a very detailed curse that you need to read and understand, because it's repeated later on throughout the book, and we need to go back to the Cyclops curse and see to what extent things are met, the things that Cyclops requests. Now, one of the things that the Cyclops requests is that if Odysseus can't be killed and all his men killed, then let Odysseus come back by himself, late and in a foreign ship. Now, again, I don't want to drift too deeply down this rabbit hole, but is this actually a perfect description of the words of the Cyclops? Or is this again Odysseus manipulating his Phaeacian audience by saying that this is the sort of, it's fated that you are the ones who send me back to my homeland. This is what the gods want. You're part of this huge story. Something again to think about. So what I would like to do now is consider this question: how is the land of the Cyclopes and its people a mirror image of Odysseus' visit to the land of the Phaeacians? Create a table. So looking back at some of the stuff that you've done, and again, this could be 20, 30 clear little points, and refer to the text as well. So a big activity, 20 minutes or so, maybe more. The Phaeacians have got fine harbours and boats that are self-guided. The Cyclops have no boats, no ability to sail. They have a good natural harbour, which they even refuse to use. The Phaeacians have peaceful assemblies where there is debate, where there is discussion. The Cyclopes have no assemblies. Try and get where it's a mirror image of Xenia, of Themis, of civilization. Can you find any similarities? In a sense, probably not many, but are there one or two? Could be. Good. Okay, so that, as they say, is that. Well done. Hope you enjoyed Book 9, and I will see you in class next week. It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from May. Where's she? May. She's busy. See you later.